Hello, in this video we're going to take a look at factoring trinomials. So we're going to be factoring things that are generally a quadratic, maybe a quadratic in form, but in general something that we can write in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c. If our a value, if that leading coefficient is a 1, those are the nice ones. Those are the ones that we like, that are just one step in. And that's what we have here for our first example, x squared minus 2x minus 63. In these problems, since we only have a 1 in front, we are looking for the factors of our constant, the numbers that multiply and give us negative 63, and add and give us our b value, which is negative 2. So we're looking at the numbers that multiply and give us negative 63. Well, 63, each of those digits are divisible by 3, so our number is divisible by 3. And 3 goes into 63 21 times. Since it's a negative, we do want to make sure and look at the negative for both of those. 3 and negative 21, as well as negative 3 and positive 21. But if we add those two numbers together, we don't get a negative 2. So neither one of those are going to work. What about 9 and 7? And if we make that 7 negative, well, that's going to give us a positive 2. So we just need to flip those, make it a negative 9 and a positive 7. So our factors are going to be x minus 9 and x plus 7. And we can multiply that out and see that we get x squared minus 2x minus 63 when we multiply out that binomial. Now, if we have a leading coefficient that is not equal to 1, then we've got a little bit of work to do here. So here we have the example 13x squared plus 22x minus 8. So in this case, we want to multiply, instead of just looking at the last number, we're going to multiply our first number times our last number. So we've got a times c, 13 times a negative 8 is equal to negative 104. Well, I'm not as familiar with the factors of negative 104 as I am 63, so let's look and involve our calculator on this one. All right, so if we pull out our calculator, we can go to our y equals menu, and we're going to put this number here, negative 104, divided by x, and this is going to help us come up with a list of factors. First thing we're going to do is make sure our table set is where we want, so let's do second and then window to get our table setup options. You can start really wherever you want. I like to start at 1 and go up by 1, so make sure these are both 1s here. And then we do need both the independent and the dependent to be on auto. So if they are not, the default is for them to be on auto, but if they are not, make sure and change that to auto. And then we want to go to our table, so we're going to do second graph. And what we see here are numbers that are giving us the numbers that multiply to give us 104. So 1 times negative 104, 2 times negative 52, 4 times negative 26. And what we want to do is we want to find the one that multiplies to give us that number in the middle, that positive 22. Now 4 and negative 26 give us a negative 22. So we can just flip that, or we can scroll all the way down to 26 and see that 26 is matched up with negative 4. We know, just like we saw in the last one, we can just put that negative on the other term. And so the two numbers that we're looking for are a negative 4 and a positive 26. Now from here, there's a couple of different ways you can do this. You can use what's called the AC, or sometimes called the grouping method. And so the AC grouping method is kind of going to go the reverse of what we do when we are multiplying binomials. And we're going to leave that 13x squared and the minus 8 exactly as they are, but instead of writing the 22, I'm going to use the two numbers that we have here, and I'm going to break that up and write it as negative 4x plus 26x. Then we've got four terms here. We can factor it by grouping. So we're going to group our first two together and our second two together. 13x squared minus 4x. Well, 13 and 4 don't have any common factors, so our greatest common factor is just going to be the x that they have in common. And if we factor out an x, we're going to be left with 13x minus 4. 26x and negative 8 have let's see, that's got a 26 is not divisible by 4 or 8, but it is divisible by 2, so we can factor out a 2. I'm going to factor out a positive 2, and we're left with 13x minus 4, which is what I want because these have to be the same. Now I can factor out that 13x minus 4, and I'm going to be left with x on our first term and plus 2 on our second term. So that would be the AC grouping method. You could also do what is called the box method, and that's kind of going backwards from what we did with the box method when we were multiplying. Now we're going to use these same four numbers that we use for the AC grouping method, but we're going to write them in a box. So we've got our first term always goes in the top left, and our last term always goes in the bottom right. And then we're going to put the two numbers that we found, the negative 4 and the 26, multiply each of those by x in the top right and the bottom left. And then now all we're going to do is factor out the GCF from each row in each column. So 13x squared and 26x, well, they both have a factor of 13 and they both have an x. So we're going to pull a 13x out on the top. Negative 4x and negative 8, well, they're both negative, so we can pull out a negative. 4 and 8 both have a common factor of 4. We can't pull out an x because we don't have an x on this last one. So one of our factors is going to be 13x minus 4. And then now we're going to factor out everything by row. 13x squared and negative 4x. The only thing they have in common is an x. And then 26x minus 8. The only thing they have in common is a 2. Since this 26 is a positive number, I'm going to go ahead and factor out a positive 2. And so we do get the factors 13x minus 4 times x plus 2. Same two factors, doesn't matter what order we get them in, depending on where you put the 26 and the 4, but you will still have the same combination there. All right, another option is the way I learned, which is the trial and error method, and that actually doesn't use the AC or the grouping method. The trial and error method, we're going to look at what are the different ways we can get our first term. Well, 13 is a prime number, so the only way we can get 13x squared is 13x and x. Those are the only combinations. 8, we've got a couple of different combinations. We could have negative 8 and positive 1. We could have it positive 8 and a negative 1. We could have a negative 4 and a positive 2. Or we could have a positive 4 and a negative 2. And I kind of merge the two, and I do look at the numbers here. True trial and error, you're just going to pick something from your first list to get you your first numbers, and then something from your second list to get your second numbers. See if that works. That doesn't work. So let's try a negative 4 and a positive 2, and that is the one we want. So trial and error has a little more guesswork. The AC grouping, if you can do it in your head, trial and error is faster. AC grouping or the box method always work. All right, let's look at one more example. All right, 48x squared plus 44x plus 8. Now remember, The first step in every one of these problems is to look for a greatest common factor. And I'm seeing a lot of 4s up there. 48, 44, and 8 are all divisible by 4. And so let's factor out that GCF of 4 before we do anything. Makes the numbers a little bit smaller, makes it a little bit easier to work with. So when we factor out a 4, 48 divided by 4 is 12. 44 divided by 4 is 11. And 8 divided by 4 is 2. And so if you want to pause the video real quick and use one of the 3 methods, you can. I'm going to go ahead and use the AC grouping method because that's the one that most students are at least familiar with. And so we're looking at A times C is going to be 12 times 2, or 24. The factors of 24 that add to 11 are 8 and 3, and that is a positive 2 and a positive 12, so this is a positive 24. So that means our 8 and our 3 have to have the same sign, and we want them to be positive because we've got a positive 11 there. So we're going to write this as 12x squared plus 8x plus 3x plus 2, and factor out the GCF of our first group. 12x squared plus 8x has a common factor of 4x. When we factor that out, we're left with 3x plus 2. 3x plus 2 does not have any common factors, so I'm going to go ahead and just factor out a 1, just so we get it in this form. A lot of people always say put the smaller number first. That way you don't ever have to worry about factoring out a 1. You will always have a GCF at the end. But we have a 3x squared in both of these terms, so we're going to factor out that, or sorry, 3x plus 2, not 3x squared, 3x plus 2 in both terms. So we're going to factor that out, and we're left with now 4x and plus 1. Double check, make sure you don't have any common factors here. If you do, something's wrong or you didn't get your GCF out at the beginning. Does not matter what order you write these in, as long as you have a 4, a 3x plus 2, and a 4x plus 1. All right, I'll see you guys next time.